Live Conference 2023.
Welcome to the Labour Party conference here in Liverpool, where in half an hour the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves will be delivering her conference speech. This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle, the Mirror's political editor, John Stevens, and the political editor at The Sun on Sunday, Kate Ferguson. Labour pledges to get Britain building in an effort to boost the economy.
The number one mission, the number one driving purpose is growth, economic growth.
The number one mission for an incoming Labour government with Keir Starmer as Prime Minister is to grow the economy.
But some leading supporters are already calling for a much bolder vision.
I want a Labour government. We need a Labour government, but they must come out with a bigger offer than they're coming out with at the moment.
As Israel continues to fight Palestinian militants, the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy condemns the attacks by Hamas, which left hundreds dead.
Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens.
Yes, welcome to Politics Live, covering the Labour Party conference here in Liverpool. As you can see, we're at the heart of one of the exhibition centres here, surrounded by delegates and members. Welcome to all of the people who are standing here listening to what our guests have to say. And there is definitely a mood of optimism. It feels upbeat. Perhaps the sunny weather has already matched that mood outside of the conference centre when we arrived yesterday, and members have been streaming in to both the exhibition hall and also to the conference stage. This is definitely the conference where the Labour Party under Sir Keir Starmer and, of course, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, who will be speaking in just under half an hour's time. They're queuing up to come in and hear what she has to say. This is where they want to set in train that they are a party prepared for government whenever that general election is called. They have a question to answer which has been put to them continually. If not them, the Conservatives, then why us, the Labour Party? Now, of course, it's been helped by that rather stunning victory at Rutherglen and Hamilton by-election, where Labour won that seat away from the SNP. Let's just have a little look. You can see there, by the way, the conference hall there. We'll keep an eye on what's going on. David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, has already given his speech. And, as I say, the Shadow Chancellor will be taking to her feet to talk for about half an hour or so to the party faithful. I just want to show our guests and our viewers your paper, John, the front page, since you're here with us. Very clearly there at the bottom you can see, exclusive Rachel Reeves, put your trust in me. She'll be setting out her stall shortly. This is the local paper, very respected local paper, the Liverpool Echo. Their front page here, a slightly different tack and call and message, which is, as Labour gathers in Liverpool, the Echo highlights the hardship and suffering of 3 Merseysiders and calls on the party to offer us all hope of real change. We heard a lot about change last week at the Conservative Party conference. What does that clear change look like, Peter?
Well, today, actually, what we're seeing with Rachel Reeves, what she's going to announce, is that we're going to lay the foundations for economic growth through a generation. And that's really important because we have a government which is sticking plaster. It's lurching from side to side on all the challenges that it has caused our economy and our society. What she will be doing is showing ways that we are going to streamline the planning system so that we can make sure that all of those critical elements of our economy going forward into the future are lined up so we can fully exploit our potential as an economy, not just for the days ahead and the months into a new government, but for the years and perhaps even parliaments into the future.
You know what you're going to be asked, which is that actually most of what we've heard from the Labour Party, rightly or wrongly, is the status quo, sticking with tax and spending policies and strict fiscal restraint, that phrase, echoed by Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. How are you going to change a country when there's no money?
Well, Keir has been very open and explicit about the political and policy plan that he's had since he became leader. The by-elections of recent times, the stunning victories that we've had, shows that the plan is working to date. What we're doing now is showing that within a year, possibly a year from an election, maybe 6 months, we are getting the foundations right that we can build on. We can do nothing without sensible economic policy that is delivering growth, and that growth is used to benefit all people across the whole economy and society and all regions of the United Kingdom. That's what Rachel's going to be showing today.
What's the real change going to have to look like?
Well, if a Labour government is going to have any money to pay for all of those different things, whether that's helping people with the cost of living crisis or whether it's improving the state of our hospitals, they're going to need to get some money from somewhere. As you say, Rachel Reeves has been very clear they're not looking to raise taxes on working people, and so the only way you're going to raise money if it isn't raise taxes, is by creating growth in the economy in some way. But obviously, all politicians on all sides say they want to grow the economy. No one says they want the opposite. It's much more difficult to work out how do you do that, especially in the short term.
What about, though, change? Because there will be a change. If Labour win the next general election, it'll be the end of 13 years of Conservative government. And maybe that's just enough for voters.
Yeah, I mean, I guess voters... all the polling shows, right, that voters want a change of sorts, and it becomes who do you trust to deliver that? So Rachel's done this big interview with John today. You can trust me. What are we going to hear Rachel say in her speech? Probably quite cautious, trying to keep the markets on side, not going to go and spend lots of money we don't have.
Unlike Liz Truss when she gave her speech, or Kwasi Kwarteng.
But the question becomes, do you trust that Rachel won't be more radical, I suppose, in power? That she will be able to be the right person to kind of run the market.
Right. Some people, of course, would like her to be more radical. Yeah. What do you say in response to that?
Well, what I say is when you actually listen to what voters are telling us, and I'm out in mid-Bedfordshire all the time campaignling for our great candidate, Alistair Strafford.
Yes, well, let's not talk too much about the by-election.
Voters are telling us all the time that they've had enough of the boosterism, the completely outlandish promises which are never met. They've had it with Boris Johnson, they've had it with Liz Truss, they've seen what economic economic irresponsibility has done to our economy. So actually taking into account the constraints of working in a market economy is important. Rachel will act within that. But within those constraints, we will find opportunities to get our economy going.
All right.
I mean, just take, for example, planning applications. The tunnel under the Thames has taken years and years and years, and it's cost £800 million in red tape and paperwork before even a shovel has hit the ground.
Well, as
if
you
we
know,
can unleash these things, think what we could do in the life sciences sector.
It's much easier to say you're going to liberalise these things than actually do them, and we will examine these things in the lead up to the speech and after.
Starting a new government from a position of a new government, so we have an opportunity to reinvent the way we do planning and to give it real direction, focused on the critical infrastructure of our country facing the future.
Well, and we could mention HS2, of course, and whether you would actually.
HS1 was delivered on time and on budget by a Labour government.
All right. I arrived yesterday and caught up with some delegates outside the conference hall and asked them about Keir Starmer's leadership and their hopes for this conference.
I think he's a wonderful leader. We are hoping to listen from him on Tuesday, and very hopeful for the next election, and he is going to take this country in a very good direction.
I saw him on a Fringe event yesterday, and he was much more inspiring than he is on TV, so I'm hoping that will come across somehow, and people will get all excited. It's a very exciting mood inside.
I want to go away with a feeling that not only can we win a general election, but that we've got a real good, strong way of going forward. So not just about Parliament, but throughout the country in terms of changing sort of the despair that you see with lots of people.
How much optimism is there, John? What have you felt talking to people here? You've heard a flavour of it from some of those delegates.
I mean, there is a good mood here. You compare it to last week where there were a lot more arguments. The party seems to be a lot more united. I definitely feel whichever side of the party people are on, the different factions, people who could be problematic for Keir Starmer this week haven't been so this week. I think that's because they see the possibility of the finish line and the possibility of Keir Starmer getting into number 10. And after 13 years of opposition, whatever wing of the Labour Party you're on, you've realised that being in opposition is pretty rubbish. So I think there is that determination to change things around. But also, the Labour Party's been through 1992, 2015, that you speak to Peter and his colleagues over a drink, over dinner, and as much as they say the fundamentals are not looking good for the Tory government, people are not presuming that they're definitely going to get into power.
Right, and that's the problem. You haven't sealed the deal. That's the expression that's always bandied about. That's why I said, you know, if not them, the Conservatives, why us? Are you going to win this general election when it comes by default?
No, you see a party that's putting in the hard work of preparing for government. Last week you saw a government putting in the hard work of preparing for opposition. It's as simple as that. And we are taking nothing for granted. What we are doing is seizing the opportunity we have to prepare a credible programme for government because we have the realistic opportunity of delivering it.
Kate?
I mean, like, tails are up here, right? You can tell they're sniffing power. It's just within their reach. Peter seems quite happy today. The question, I think, the more interesting question in a way for the Labour Party is, you're right, are they going to kind of resonate with the country this week? Are they going to connect with readers like mine? These are swing voters. These want to not be told the Tories are rubbish, blah, blah, blah. They want to know what they're buying from you too. They want a bit of hope, a bit of optimism, sketching out your own offer to them. And I think that's what this week will be quite interesting in finding out.
And I think there is a real opportunity here for the Labour Party. I mean, this may sound a bit party political, but you look at the big challenges facing the country now, whether that's cost of living or housing, they were really skirted over last week. In Rishi Sunak's big speech at the end of conference, he only made one mention of housing, and that was to do with how they're going to build 10,000 houses on the site of HS2 in Euston. He didn't really cover it. And then usually in these party conference season, you have one party take it in turns to speak. Rishi Sunak had his turn last week. And then, surprise, surprise, this week he's having another go this morning. He's been out doing an announcement, I think, somewhere in the East Midlands. They had an announcement in Bargain today on housing. They realised that they didn't say anything interesting in it last week, and now they're having a second go.
You can add into that public services, on NHS, on crime and order with Yvette and her announcements. We have a programme for government, and it is working and responding. The voters and the country is responding to it.
All right, well, we're going to hear from the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, in about 15 minutes' time. But let's just pause for a moment because the backdrop to this Labour Party conference is what Israel has called and is calling a war, following the unprecedented attack by Hamas militants. Hamas, prescribed as a terrorist organisation by the UK, it controls the Gaza Strip, from where thousands of rockets were launched at the weekend, 700 Israelis killed and 100 or so taken hostage, with harrowing images. The Israelis have retaliated, and there are at least 400 Palestinians also killed. Let's take a look at the front pages because it's on almost all of them. The Guardian here, violence escalates as death toll surges to over 1,000. We can have a look at the headline on the Financial Times. Israel at war after deadly Hamas attack. And finally, the Daily Mail has this front page covering the attack. Pawns of merciless terrorists. A mother with babies in her arms, a woman and her 2 young daughters, a distraught boy of 10. Just some of the 100 hostages stolen by murderous Hamas invaders. Well, David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, addressed all of this directly in his speech a short while ago.
Labour utterly condemns Hamas's appalling attack on Israel. There is never a justification for terrorism. Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens. The hostages so cruelly taken, including children, should be released immediately, and Hamas's indiscriminate attack set back the cause of peace. Both Israelis and Palestinians paying a terrible price. There will not be a just and lasting peace until Israel is secure, Palestine is a sovereign state, and both Israelis and Palestinians enjoy security, dignity, and human rights.
David Lammy there, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, talking about and responding to the attacks by Hamas in Israel. Peter, are you comfortable with the image which you can show of Labour MP Apsana Begum? There she is in the middle. She was at the stall on Saturday with activists at the Palestine Solidarity Campaign here in Liverpool, and they are calling for an emergency demonstration protest outside the Israeli embassy in London today to demand Israel end its violent imposition of a system of occupation, apartheid and colonisation over the Palestinian people. Are you comfortable with that actually taking place with a Labour MP in the backdrop of those attacks on Israel?
You have just seen David Lammy say in the most clear and unequivocal terms, condemning the attack, the terrorist attack. It was terror because it was launched against a music festival. It was designed to cause terror amongst Israel, against the Israeli state. Labour Party has come out absolutely fulsomely against it. They have the right, Israel has a right to go and defend its territory and retrieve the people who have been taken hostage.
And is there anything wrong with Apsana Begum joining the Palestine Solidarity
Well,
campaign?
the point I'm trying to make is that David speaks for the Labour Party, nobody else does. So whereas people might well be saying other things, they do not speak for the Labour Party, not in its entirety, not in its leadership, not in the intent that we have to make sure that Israel knows fulsomely, just as we have done as a country, speak with one voice when it comes to issues like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that our country is speaking with one voice, that we stand against terrorism, we stand against the actions of Hamas, and we support Israel in the actions it must take in order to defend its territory, its citizens, and make sure that those hostages are retrieved.
All right, and I'm sure we are going to hear much, much more in terms of what is unfolding in the Middle East, in Israel and in the Gaza Strip. But let's return to the economy, because we have the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, taking to her feet in just under 15 minutes' time, setting out the economic vision for a Labour government if they win the next general election. We know what the core mission is, its growth. Let's hear what Sir Keir Starmer said at the weekend.
It is the single defining mission of an incoming Labour government. I've set out 5 missions, 5 purpose-driven things that we will go for over 5 and 10 years.
And one of them is the highest sustained growth in the G7.
It is the central one. It's not just one of them.
Okay.
It is the central mission
of
the incoming Labour government. Because everything else hangs off that.
Well, if everything hangs off that, how are you going to get growth? Everyone wants growth. Everyone talks about growth. Every Prime Minister talks about it. And we haven't really had high levels of growth for at least 13 years. How are you going to get it?
Yes, when you say 13 years, but there's one thing that's happened over the last 13 years. We've had a Conservative government,
right.
And which had growth of half of what we had before. So we know we can get it because the last Labour government delivered it consistently over 13 years.
They were completely different economic circumstances.
I'll answer the questions
when Labour
directly.
won in 1997, they inherited a much more benign, favourable economic situation. You are going to inherit something completely different.
Which is why Rachel is spelling out getting the fundamentals right of our economy, laying the foundation. So earlier you said, is it exciting? You've just spelt out exactly why getting the foundations for a growing economy is right, getting the planning system right, making sure that we can actually, you can't have a growing economy when 7.5 million people are waiting for treatment on the NHS because they're not able to be economically active and fulfil their potential in the economy. We understand that ending the waiting list targets for the NHS is part of economic growth and unleashing our potential. We understand that there are long-term investments we need to make. I will make a speech this afternoon. I will talk about 10-year funding for critical infrastructure in the life sciences sector and R&D.
It's going to be long-term, and a bit of honesty about how long it is going to take. You are not going to be able to get the sort of levels of growth within months of winning if you do a general election next year. You mentioned the NHS and the strikes that people are suffering, and perhaps some of them on the sort of protest lines themselves. What is it a Labour government is going to do? There is no talk of any extra money to end these strikes, so they'll continue under a Labour government.
The first thing we'll do is talk. I mean, the government haven't had talks with unions and staff working in the NHS for months. They've taken a polar opposite view. If you look at things like what the last Labour government did for delivering peace in Northern Ireland, we ended an armed civil conflict by getting in the room and never leaving. This lot can't get in the room and talk about pay and wages and terms and conditions without flouncing out and refusing to talk. You've got to get in the room, you've got to do a deal, and we've seen where deals have been made in the transport sectors, up in other parts of public services, where deals have been made. It's done by diligence, getting in the room and not leaving until a deal has been done.
It does
Unions have been flexible when they've been met with a flexible
well, actually, that's interesting. Do you think, just by having a Labour government, that there is a political element to these strikes, that even if no more money is offered, that actually Labour will have more success at ending the strikes?
I think some of these health unions have become so politicised and really quite to the left that actually if Labour do get elected, they might find it quite hard to negotiate a settlement. Do these current strikes have a political dimension? I think most people would think they probably do now, and the people inside government think there's an element of them wanting to not just get better wages, but actually overturn the government and get Labour in. So yeah, there probably is a dimension to that.
Returning to growth, Keir Starmer says he has a strategic plan for growth. We don't quite know the details. Maybe he doesn't yet know what the details are. One of the problems, John, is that why should people here trust what Sir Keir Starmer says? When he ran for the leadership, he had a very different strategic plan for growth. It's all been dropped.
I think that all leaders, when they come in, they may have different things they promise in their leadership election, which then get filtered out by the time it gets to an election. With Rishi Sunak, he promised all number of things in his leadership race. Remember when he was going to say he was going to charge people £10 if they didn't get their GP appointment? Remember what the Tories said at the last election when they said they weren't going to raise national insurance, and surprise, surprise, Rishi Sunak as Chancellor did put it up. So I think all parties on all sides, you do see the finessing ideas and things change as they come along. But on the particular point of growth and how can you show that you're going to stick to your promises, it is really difficult. The Tories said they were going to build hundreds of thousands of homes every year, and actually, despite having an 80-seat majority, they found it very difficult to make those changes to planning law, and I think the Labour Party will also find it very difficult. Today, Rachel Reeves, one of the things she's been talking about is green investment. How do you build those renewable power stations, wind farms, battery farms, pylons across the countryside? You can imagine the Tory attack ads already saying if you vote for Labour, they are going to completely cover over our countryside with these ugly pylons. So, yeah, the idea everyone wants to do it is much more difficult in reality.
I mean, let's just take a couple of the things that have been scrapped by Keir Starmer, rightly or wrongly. Increasing tax on top earners, nationalising all of the utility companies. That was a strategic plan for growth or for the economy. It's all been dropped. Why should we trust what you and Keir Starmer say you're going to do now? You'll come up against pushback, you'll drop it.
What people want from leadership is people who adapt to the circumstances of the moment. We have had the mini budget that blew a hole in our economy. We've had COVID. We've had the cost of living crisis exacerbated by poor government
that's what the government
choices.
says all the time.
Yeah, so we have to adapt. We're the opposition. We're not a protagonist in the way that our economy is being run at the moment, so we have to adapt. Keir Starmer has adapted, but now we are in the period where we are moving decisively towards a general election because the government can't delay it more than a year and a bit. So we are actually now giving policies and indications of the direction of travel, which will be firm going into it, depending on whether we have another mini budget, whether we have another 2 prime ministers between now and the next general election. Because we had 3 in one year, we might have 3 in the next.
I mean,
so these are the challenges we have, and this is the landscape which we have to. So we can't give all of the exact definitive answers that people sometimes ask for until we know the exact circumstances of what we're going to inherit. We thought we would inherit HS2 being on track. Because of the way it's been acted and cancelled and recancelled and recommissioned, it's £60 billion over budget and nothing is being done. When we delivered HS1, it was done on time, on budget, at the same cost as France and Japan doing their high-speed networks. This one became 4 times more expensive and it's been scrapped and not delivered.
I mean, Kate, there will be a reassurance for some floating voters that not much will change necessarily if Labour wins next year. And maybe that is where they're occupying the ground that says you can trust us, you can be reassured by us, we're not going to be too radical.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Keir wants to reassure voters that it's not going to be too radical. There's a thing about responding to events, and there's another thing about just shedding your skin like a chameleon or a snake so that voters stop trusting you. And Keir has to be careful that he's not seen as the latter. Yeah, I do wonder what the difference between their policy kind of really is. The planning policy Rachel announcing today sounds very similar to what we heard from lid, very similar to some of the stuff we hear from Rishi even. So there's not much, there's kind of a fag paper between the two on that at the moment.
Right, I mean, what is going to be transformative, Peter? I mean, your only substantive proposed tax rises are scrapping the non-dom status and VAT on private schools, which would raise £3.2 billion a year and £1.7 billion a year respectively. Let's just put that next to a £1,000 billion of day-to-day spending currently by the government. So you're talking about £5 billion in terms of what you propose to transform the country, compared to £1,000 billion of day-to-day spending. They're the figures from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. I mean,
well, so many of the issues and challenges in the NHS are interconnected because everything is front-loaded now. Money is being squandered on managing the backlog of treatments. So if we can tackle the backlog with our NHS staffing plan, which is being funded by the non-dom tax status, by increasing profoundly the number of diagnostic materials, which is funded by that tax, but also making sure that we can get an pay overtime, fully funded overtime, paid for by the non-dom tax status being scrapped. We can start tackling the one thing that is an anchor on us being able to tackle all the other problems in the NHS. But don't forget, when the Tories came in, they broke up all of the strategic bodies in the NHS. They scrapped all of the targets, but they didn't replace it with anything else that had grip. We need to make sure we can end the waiting list challenge.
With more private sector involvement, which actually angers a lot of people here.
We will use whatever talent is out there in whatever bit of our country to tackle the priorities and make sure that patients get the treatment they need, because so many of them are living in pain. So many of them can't actually work properly in the workplace and earn the money that they need to. They're being held back. Our economy is being held back. Our country is being held back by this one issue. But this is all interconnected. So economic growth linked to the waiting list challenges. Other challenges in the NHS is being held back because everything is being dominated by the waiting list challenge. So we will use the money we can to end that challenge and then start working on all the strategic long-term challenges we face in the NHS as well.
I mean, one of the people I spoke to yesterday raised the issue about the health service, about her fears and concerns about more private sector involvement. It was started actually under Tony Blair. It hasn't, despite what many people think, it hasn't gone up that much under 13 years of Conservative rule. And now Peter is saying there's a real argument, as does Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, for actually turbo boosting that if it clears the backlog. How will that go down here?
I think it might not go down well with all quarters, but if you're someone who's been waiting months and months and months for a hip operation, you're unable to work, you're not really going to care what sort of hospital you get that operation in. And we have heard announcements from the Labour Party this week. The big announcement from Keir into Sunday was about how they were going to spend £1.5 billion on both increasing the amount of scanning equipment in hospitals, but also offering more overtime to doctors and nurses to clear the backlogs at evenings and weekends. But obviously, there's only so many workers in the NHS. We know that a lot of doctors and nurses already say they're overstretched. And so where else are you going to look for that capacity? You are going to have to look at things like private sector.
Let's welcome Hilary Shand. Hello to you. Everyone will have noticed that we've lost Kate Ferguson, who's gone into the hall. Thank you for joining us. You're a Labour member and councillor, also a member of Momentum, the grassroots organisation that was set up in the wake of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. We've got Peter Carl here. Is it a bold enough vision for you, or do you agree with Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, that she wants to hear something more radical from Labour?
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly want to see Labour going further with this. We want to see commitments to real investment in this country. You know, we've got crumbling schools, we need investment in our hospitals, in our public services. What we would like to see, of course, is a commitment to nationalisation of our public services. And as we know, those policies tend to poll very well with the public. And at the end of the day, we've seen that the public are absolutely sick of the Tories. They are sick of austerity, and what we really need to see is a real investment in this country and a move away from what progressive think tanks are calling an investment phobia.
Well, I mean, when you say nationalisation, it's not going to happen. I know that there is a debate this afternoon, but the Labour Party doesn't take policy from the conference floor in that sense. What do you say to Labour members who would like to see nationalising of, if not all the utilities, some of them?
Well, first of all, I would say I imagine that there's a lot more common ground than there is difference in what we would like to achieve in the Labour government. And the thing we agree on most of all is we need to win an election in the first place. Otherwise, we talk and we have these arguments and we don't deliver anything. When it comes to nationalisation, what we're going to do is be pragmatic about what will deliver the best outcomes for service users, but also best value for money for taxpayers. And this is always the trade-off. Where we see that these things align, such as we have with the rail service, we found a way of cost-effectively bringing ownership of the rail network back into public hands, but doing so in a way that's linked to a better service for passengers. So these are the circumstances where we're very open to considering these things. What we won't do is just do it on ideological grounds when we think it would deliver bad value for money for the taxpayers. So, you know, there are very clear areas where we are looking at ownership as a tool for delivering better service and value for money. In those circumstances, you know, of course, it makes sense. But just doing so just on ideological grounds doesn't. And I think that there's something there that I imagine that we would find common ground on.
Hilary?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously extremely encouraging if that is something that, but it isn't something that we're consistently hearing from the leadership, I would say. And also, you know, what we have to be really cautious about here is this talk about sort of fiscal responsibility, that it isn't just fiscal conservatism by another name. You know, what we want to see a Labour government is really transformative change, because people are sick of the broken Britain that we've got, and you cannot fix this broken country on the cheap.
Right, without more money. I mean, the £28 billion extra a year that's being pledged by a Labour government if it wins the election on green policies, that's already been diluted. It's already been delayed, certainly, by a year. That's the sort of thing that Hilary is worried about.
But once again, we've got to learn the lessons of Liz Truss's leadership and the mini budget. If you can't take the markets with you, then it will be completely unaffordable to do anything. Now, other countries, every other like-minded country, every other G7 country borrows to invest in critical infrastructure, to recapitalise your economy so it's facing the future and creating great jobs that are accessible to everyone. That's what we want to do. So we will get to that point where we are investing on that scale. But we have to be realistic that there are lots of barriers to doing it from day one. But we will get there as a programme for government.
There's an incredibly simple solution to this. Tax the wealthiest in this country. The Trade Union Congress recently published a paper.
Who do you mean by the wealthiest?
So the Trade Union Congress recently published a paper that said a modest wealth tax on the top 140,000 richest people in this country would raise £10 billion.
Right, but a wealth tax isn't on the table, is it?
No, we will tax fairly, we will spend wisely. We are living in a world which has the highest tax rate for 80 years. The problem in our economy at the moment is growth. We have to make sure we invest wisely, get growth into the economy, use that to create jobs that are accessible for everyone in this wave of technology and innovation that's about to land on our shores and transform society. If we're not careful, this will end up being for the elite, by the elites, and the money will be going into the elites' pockets. We make sure that this is available to everyone, from the jobs that are created to the regions of the country that are normally left out. These are the progressive causes that the next Labour government will champion, and it will be transformative for everyone who lives here,
and you've
not
definitely
just some
pledged
people.
that, and we will hold your feet to the fire, of course, on those. Are you prepared to wait? Are you prepared to wait some time if Labour wins the election before any of the sorts of things that you would like to see come to the fore?
Well, I think that issue will raise its head very quickly, because what you will find is that when you're on the doorstep, and Peter's been on the doorstep with me in Worthing, and what you will find on the doorstep is people are asking, why can't I afford to pay my energy bills, and yet the energy companies are raking in billions in profits? And that is where the real dilemma is here. So we've got to try and change this rhetoric, and we've got to get back to what people are really talking about on the doorstep.
We're going to go inside the hall in just a moment when Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, takes to her feet. Matt Rack, who's the fairly new president of the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, said, and I'm paraphrasing, there's no point having a Labour government if it's austerity with a different colour rosette. Has he got a point?
Well, that is one of the accusations that has been made against the current Labour leadership. It's one of the things I raised with Rachel Reeves when I interviewed her yesterday, and she said that very much we're not bringing back austerity Mark II. She says we just need to show the country that we are being sensible with their finances. And I think that is going to be one of the messages you hear over and over and over from her in her speech in a few minutes, is that she wants to show the country that, yes, she is going to change the country. There is stuff the Labour Party is going to put money into, but they're not going to do it at the cost of looking irresponsible with taxpayers' money.
Right, and I mean, in terms of the lobbying that comes from people like you, you're being asked, certainly at this conference, and people are on message at this conference because they say they want a Labour government. How long will it be before you start to register complaint or opposition if the party doesn't move?
I mean, we're very consistent. There isn't any point at which we won't be registering our opposition if the party doesn't move. We're doing that day in, day out. That's what we exist to do. We want to see a radical change. We want change from this Labour government, and we will consistently call for that. We are now, and we will be right up until the point they take
But it's
power.
likely that strikes are going to continue if Labour wins next year. There's not a penny more being pledged to striking workers or to the unions representing them. So that could well be a feature under a Labour government that continues.
Yeah, of course it will be, and that is exactly why we need to change this rhetoric. We need to look more closely at how we tax the wealthy. That is where we can get that money from. And I think most people would agree that actually the 140,000 richest people in this country could afford to give a little bit more to our striking doctors.
We have to embed the word radical in the lived experience that people
All right.
have. It will be radical to make sure that we have
Here is Rachel
women and
Reeves.
girls. You know, these are the
As
radical
your Shadow Chancellor, today I make this commitment to you and to our country. Out of the wreckage of Tory misrule, Labour will restore our economic credibility. We will lift our living standards, make work pay, rebuild our public services, invest in homegrown industries in every corner of our country, and together we will get Britain its future back. This is a momentous week. For too long, we have gathered in these halls with the power to talk, but not with the power to do. 13 years of opposition to remind us of that eternal political truth, that it is only through power that we can put our principles into action. Under Keir's leadership, that opportunity is finally within our grasp, but only if we allow no complacency, only if we fight for every single vote, only if we work every day to show that we are the party with the discipline, with the determination, and with the vision to rebuild Britain. Labour's task is to restore hope to our politics. The hope that lets us face the future with confidence, with a new era of economic security. Because there is no hope without security. You cannot dream big if you cannot sleep in peace at night. The peace that comes from knowing that you have enough to put aside for a rainy day. And the knowledge that when you need them, strong public services will be there for you and your family. The strength that allows a society to withstand global shocks, because it is from those strong foundations of security that hope can spring. Conference, the choice at the next election is this: 5 more years of the Tory chaos and uncertainty, which has left working people worse off, or a changed Labour Party offering stability, investment and economic security so that working people are better off. It falls to us to show that Labour are ready to serve, ready to lead and ready to rebuild Britain. In chess, you learn to think several moves ahead. But even I couldn't have predicted the mayhem that we have seen, week after week, year after year, from this Conservative government. First, austerity, then Brexit without a plan, and then their kamikaze budget. Growth weak, wages flat, taxes up, the price of energy up, the price of the family food shop up, and mortgage bills up hundreds of pounds every single month. Never forget. This time last year, in their clamour to cut taxes for those at the top, the Conservatives caused market chaos, crashed the economy, and left working people to pay the price. That is why you can never trust the Tories with our economy ever again. what did we see last week from the Tories in Manchester? A government bereft of ambition for Britain, so ready for opposition that they're behaving like they're already there, looking inwards, not outwards, to the country, queuing to cheer the extremists rather than kicking them out of their party. And telling us what we already know. Liz Truss might be out of Downing Street, but she is still leading the Conservative Party. The one sensible thing that they came up with was their phased smoking ban, which we support. However, I do fear for the Conservative Party. With such a shortage of fag packets, what on earth are they going to write their next policy on? And what about the Prime Minister? Well, Rishi Sunak had the chance to denounce the politics and the policies of Liz Truss, to make clear that he would never repeat her mistakes. But he didn't. If he's too weak to stand up to them 1 year in, what chance do you give him 5 years in? Be in no doubt, the biggest risk to Britain's economy is 5 more years of the Conservative Party. In contrast, Labour's defining economic mission is to restore growth to Britain. But it is no use simply claiming that we want economic growth without new ideas for how we can achieve it. That starts with understanding the world as it is today, a world that has been reshaped by new technologies, by the pandemic, by war, by great power rivalries, and by the climate crisis. In short, globalisation as we once knew it is dead. Disruption to supply chains that span the globe has revealed the perils of prizing only the fastest and the cheapest, and our ability to make the things essential to our national security has been depleted. Great gaps have been allowed to open up between different parts of the country, and we have time and time again been buffeted by global forces. In this new age of insecurity, it is no longer enough, if it ever was, for government to turn a blind eye to where things are made or who is making them, to run an economy based on the contributions of only a few people, a few industries and a few parts of our country. A changed world demands a new business model for Britain. It is an approach that I call securonomics. That means government putting economic security first. Security for family finances and security for our national economy. It means we must rebuild our ability to do, make and sell more here in Britain, so we are less exposed to global shocks. Governments around the world have come to understand this in a way that our government cannot. That wealth does not just trickle down from a few at the top, but rests on the contribution of the many, on the skill and dedication of those who work in our everyday economy. Care workers, postal workers, supermarket workers, and on entrepreneurs, innovators and scientists. Growth from the bottom up and the middle out. An economy rebuilt in the interests of working people. Because from security comes hope. Labour will commit itself to rebuilding that security, to restoring that hope. Labour is ready to serve, ready to lead, ready to rebuild Britain. Conference, I do not underestimate the scale of the task ahead of us, nor the problems we would inherit in government. They demand hard work, determination, and tough decisions. The exhaustion of Conservative ideas does not give us the freedom to push through programmes detached from our present economic reality, or take for granted those people who we seek to represent. Change will only be achieved on the basis of iron discipline. Working people rightly expect nothing less. Because when you play fast and loose with the public finances, you put at risk family finances. When the prices of food and energy and housing soar, it is working people that pay that price. Like the mum that I met in Scarborough earlier this year, a mental health nurse who had moved back home with her mum for 5 years with her young family to save the deposit to buy a home of her own, only to find that when she was on the cusp of fulfilling that dream, after all that sacrifice, that the mortgage costs that she would face outstripped her income, and she had no chance of meeting them. This is one of thousands upon thousands of similar stories. Stories I hear wherever I go, of people who have worked hard and done all the right things, but whose dreams have been dashed by the choices of this Conservative government, people who we must not and will not let down. So, a Labour government will not waver from ironclad fiscal rules, nor play the Tory game of undermining our economic institutions. The last Labour government granted operational independence to the Bank of England. I started my career as an economist at the bank, and I saw the lasting contribution that that made to Britain's economic success. So we will protect the independence of the bank, the Office for Budget Responsibility, and our civil service. And as Chancellor, I will put forward a new Charter for Budget Responsibility, a new fiscal lock guaranteeing in law that any government making permanent and significant tax and spending changes will be subject to an independent forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Never again. Never again will we allow a repeat of the devastation that Liz Truss and the Tory party have inflicted upon family finances. Never again will a Prime Minister or Chancellor be allowed to rush through plans that are uncosted, unscrutinised and wholly detached from economic reality. But let me address directly those who say that to make hard choices is to make the same choices as the Tory party. To them, I say, economic responsibility does not detract from advances for working people. It is the foundation upon which progress is built. Hard choices, but Labour choices. The choice to back our high streets and small businesses by requiring online tech giants to pay their fair share. The choice to levy a proper windfall tax on the huge profits that the energy giants are making. So that working people do not bear the brunt of a crisis that they did not create. The choice to abolish the non-dom tax status and put that money into our National Health Service instead. Because, Conference, if you make your home in Britain, you should pay your taxes here too, and with Labour, you will. And another choice. In my first budget as Chancellor of the Exchequer, I will end the tax loophole which exempts private schools from paying VAT and business rates. And Conference, we will put that money into helping the 93% of our children who are in our state schools. And I tell you, if Rishi Sunak wants a fight on this, if the party that has herded our children into porta cabins while our school roofs crumble wants a fight about who has the most aspiration for our children, then I say, bring it on. Conference, we are ready to serve, ready to lead, and ready to rebuild Britain. Thank you. I didn't come into politics to raise taxes on working people. Indeed, I want them to be lower. But the Tories have piled 25 tax rises on ordinary working people and businesses, while allowing the wealthiest to avoid taxes, keeping loopholes open, and letting government waste spiral. Taxpayers' money should be spent with the same care with which we spend our own money. I remember my mum would sit around the kitchen table with her bank statements and her receipts. We weren't badly off, but we didn't have money to spare. For my mum, every penny mattered. I learned that same lesson at the Bank of England. Responsibility must always come first. But for too long, Tory governments have allowed money to be wasted and taxpayers defrauded. So Labour will wage a war against fraud, waste and inefficiency. Today, I can announce 3 further fronts in Labour's war on waste. First, we will crack down on Tory ministers' private jet habit. What is Rishi Sunak so scared of up there in his private jet? Meeting a voter? Well, we will properly enforce the ministerial code on the use of private planes and save millions of pounds for taxpayers in the process. Second, we will slash government consultancy spending, which has almost quadrupled in just 6 years. Now, consultants can play an important role, but taxpayers must get value for money. So we will introduce tough new rules. If a government wants to bring in consultants, they must demonstrate value for money. And if they cannot, that request will be denied. We will aim to cut consultancy spending in half over the next Parliament. And third, we will go after those who profited from the carnival of waste during the pandemic. Today, the costs to the taxpayer of COVID fraud is estimated at £7.2 billion, with every single one of those cheques signed by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor. And yet, just 2% of all fraudulent COVID grants have been recovered. So I can announce today that we will appoint a COVID corruption commissioner supported by a hit squad of investigators, equipped with the powers they need and the mandate to do whatever it takes to claw back the money that has ripped off the taxpayer, to take the fraudsters to court and to get back every penny of taxpayers' money that they can. Because, Conference, that money belongs in our NHS, it belongs in our police, it belongs in our school. And let me tell you, we want that money back. We are ready to serve, we are ready to lead. Conference, we are ready to rebuild Britain. Labour will tax fairly and spend wisely. But, Conference, I must tell you, you cannot tax and spend your way to economic growth. The lifeblood of a growing economy is business investment. It is investment that allows businesses to expand, create jobs and compete with international rivals, with new plants, factories and research labs coming to Britain, not France or Germany or America. But today, we lag well behind our peers for private sector investment as a share of GDP, with tens of billions of pounds less spent on new machinery and new infrastructure. Is that because British people aren't as hardworking, or as creative, or as enterprising? No. British businesses, from life sciences to creative industries, from digital to financial services, can and do lead the world. But they have been held back by the chaos and instability of this Conservative government. So Labour will aim to restore investment as a share of our GDP to the level that it was under the last Labour government and to bring us in line with our peers, adding an additional £50 billion to our GDP every single year, worth £1,700 for every household in Britain. But we know too that asking businesses to do all the heavy lifting while government steps back is not an option. As our competitors understand, there is a role for government in encouraging and de-risking investment in new and growing industries. So we will provide catalytic investment through a new National Wealth Fund. Financial responsibility means knowing when not to spend, but it also means making sure that when you invest, you get the bang for your buck. So we will set that new National Wealth Fund a target. For every pound of investment that we put in, we will leverage in 3 times as much private investment. And Conference, be in no doubt, no matter what political games the Tories are willing to play over our energy transition, no matter how willing they are to ignore the warnings of businesses, investors and trade unions, no matter how many times they put short-term political calculation over the security and the prosperity of the British people, Labour will make the long-term decisions and invest in British industry, driving down bills and creating new jobs. Jobs for plumbers, builders and electricians. Jobs for scientists, designers and engineers. In green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. In Grangemouth, Middlesbrough, Swansea and Hull. In steel, in Sheffield, Scunthorpe and Port Talbot. In offshore wind, in Fife, in Plymouth and Newport. Making electric car batteries in Coventry, Sunderland and in Blyth, and jobs retrofitting homes in Keighley, Rochester and Warrington, and in every village, town and city across our great country. Ready to serve, ready to lead, ready to rebuild Britain. And Conference, if we want to spur investment, restore economic security and revive growth, then we must get Britain building again. The Tories would have you believe we can't build anything in Britain anymore. In fact, the single biggest obstacle to building infrastructure, to investment and to growth in this country is the Conservative Party itself. Just look at the fate of HS2. A major transport project lost, another promise broken, because the government could not keep costs under control. By the time this government even recognised that they had a problem, the project was already £30 billion over budget. The question must be, How was it ever allowed to get to that point? If I were in the Treasury, I would have been on the phone to the Chief Executive of HS2 non-stop, demanding answers and solutions on behalf of taxpayers, businesses and commuters. But with this government, it has become a pattern. When it comes to getting things built and projects delivered, Britain has become the sick man of Europe, with HS2 coming in at 10 times the cost of the French equivalent. And that is why our Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, will commission an independent expert inquiry into HS2 to learn the lessons for the future. Because many more major government capital projects are running over time, over budget, and are in danger of going undelivered. It is incumbent on government to make sure major projects are delivered on time and on budget. I will not tolerate taxpayers' money being treated with the disrespect we have seen over recent years. I will not turn a blind eye to dither, delay and incompetence. I will hold those responsible to account. I will demand action when they are not delivering value for money. And so I have asked Darren Jones, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, to work closely with industry experts and trade unions and to examine line by line every ongoing major capital project to make sure that on day one of a Labour government, we are ready to get Britain building again. If the Tories won't build, if the Tories can't build, then we will. We will take on our antiquated planning system. Since 2012, decision times for national infrastructure have increased by 65%, now taking 4 years. With Labour, that will change. So today, I am announcing our plans to get Britain building, a once-in-a-generation set of reforms to accelerate the building of critical infrastructure for energy, transport and housing, to fast-track battery factories, life sciences and 5G infrastructure, the things that we need to succeed in the decades to come, and to tackle the litigation which devours time and money before we even see shovels in the ground, and to make sure that when a local community hosts national infrastructure, they will feel the benefits, including through lower energy bills. Conference, it is time that we had a government that matched the ambition that people have for their families and communities, a government siding with the builders, not the blockers, a government that will get Britain building again, and with Labour, we will. Let me give you one example. Our energy grid. Today, new developments are being forced to wait up to 15 years until the late 2030s to connect to the grid. £200 billion worth of projects stuck in limbo. So today, working closely with Ed Miliband, I can announce Labour's plans to rewire Britain, securing the supply chain we need for lower bills, and to build faster and cheaper, opening up new grid connections to competitive tendering. And because the British people should own a stake in their energy system, the publicly owned Great British Energy will look to bid into that competition. 220,000 new jobs, lower bills for good, and energy security for Britain. And there's more. We will invest in expanding local authorities' planning capacity to speed up decisions. And here is how we will pay for it. Rocketing interest rates have dealt a hammer blow to the dreams of millions of people who want to own their own home, when already that dream was far too remote for far too many people. It is not right that while so many people are struggling, many homes are bought by overseas buyers who may own a property but leave it vacant, driving up prices while families and young people are desperate to get onto the housing ladder. So because 1 year ago, Keir Starmer set out the ambition for the next Labour government to make 70% of British households homeowners, because a house should be first a home and not an asset. And because, Conference, it is time we built the homes our young people need. We will raise the stamp duty surcharge on overseas buyers to get Britain building. Conference, Labour is the party of the builders, not the blockers. Labour is the party of economic growth. And it is now beyond doubt. It is Labour that is the party of home ownership in Britain today. Working people need the skills to succeed in the modern economy and the security to utilise them. From security, hope. The parents struggling to balance caring responsibilities and work. The key workers struggling to pay the rent. The would-be entrepreneurs struggling to access the finance to turn brilliant ideas into commercial reality. A productive economy cannot be built on such fragile foundations, because there is now a mountain of economic evidence that higher wages and greater job security have real benefits for businesses. And there is also a mountain of human evidence of too many children growing up in poverty, of too many parents skipping meals, of too many people waiting by the phone to find out whether they have work that day or not. So, as Angela Rayner set out yesterday, the next Labour government will offer a new deal for working people. 0-hour contracts banned, fire and rehire gone, sick pay strengthened, and basic rights from day one. And Conference, it was the last Labour government which finally delivered on the promise of Keir Hardie to implement a national minimum wage. The fight against poverty pay has always been at the very heart of our movement. And so the next Labour government will go further. Not a rebrand of the minimum wage like the Tories, but for the first time, a minimum wage taking account of the real cost of living. Finally, Conference, with Labour we will have a genuine living wage. The post of Chancellor of the Exchequer has existed now for 800 years. In that time, not one single woman has held that post. Conference, when we next meet, I intend to address this hall as Britain's first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. To do so would be the privilege of my lifetime. But more important than that, it would come with a great weight of responsibility. The responsibility to show our daughters, to show my daughter, that they should place no limits on their ambitions. And the responsibility too, like Labour women before, to drive progress for women. Still, half a century after the Equal Pay Act, women in Britain earn on average 15% less than men. On current trends, it may take until 2044 for that gap to disappear. Well, women cannot afford to wait that long, and nor should we have to. The work of women have been undervalued for too long, and that is why I have asked Frances O'Grady to examine how we can go further and faster, so that the next Labour government makes the next great strides towards ending the gender pay gap once and for all, ready to serve, ready to lead, and ready to rebuild Britain. We have changed this party so that we may have the chance to change our country. Labour will fight this next election on the economy. Every day we will expose what the Conservatives have done to our country. Because the questions people should ask themselves ahead of the next election are simple. Do you and your family feel better off than you did 13 years ago? Do our schools, our hospitals, our police work better than they did 13 years ago? Frankly, is there anything in Britain that works better than when the Conservatives came to office 13 years ago? Now, if you do think that Britain is better after 13 years, if you think our country is as good as it can be right now, if after all of this you want to leave your future, your children's future, our country's future, in the hands of the Conservative Party, then I may not be able to persuade you. But if, like me, you think that Britain can do better, that Britain can be better off, if you, like me, believe that it is time to put security first and reject the risk of 5 more years of chaos and decline, then join us. Join us in our mission to rebuild Britain. Join us in our mission to give Britain its future back, creating new jobs, driving down bills, reviving our high streets, rescuing our public services, more teachers in our schools, more police on our streets, more doctors and nurses in our hospitals, lifting families from poverty, achieving energy security and bringing growth back to Britain. We are here, ready to serve, ready to lead, and together we can and we will rebuild Britain.
Well, Rachel Reeves, the woman who would like to become the UK's first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. They're on their feet. They were on their feet several times through that hard-hitting, unyielding and commanding speech from Rachel Reeves, where she set out in no uncertain terms about how she is going to rule with an iron rod of discipline. She said it numerous times. If they were uncertain in the hall, they won't be now if they were going to ask her for money if Labour wins the next election. She said that she would run the Exchequer with an iron discipline. She would have ironclad fiscal rules, never to be a repeat of what happened under the former Conservative Prime Minister Liz Truss and her then Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, when she said they caused market chaos, crashed the economy and left the working poor to pay the price. She talked about a war on waste, 3 particular areas that she is going to target. A ban on private jets and planes, referring to Rishi Sunak. Tough new rules on bringing in consultants would have to go through her. And she wants to claw back every single penny of the £7 billion that she said was wasted on COVID fraud and COVID contracts. There'll be a new commissioner who will oversee all of that. Let me bring you back here to reintroduce our guest, John Stevens, political editor at The Mirror, Isabel Hardman, assistant editor at The Spectator, and joining us is businessman Ian Anderson, chairman of Cicero, a company focusing on public policy and corporate communications. First of all, Isabel, your reaction to Rachel Reeves, the delivery, the confidence. She was nervous a little bit at the beginning, but once she got into her stride...
Yeah, I'm pretty scared of her now. And I think you could see from the reactions of the shadow cabinet, who have the joy of watching this speech whilst being filmed, watching it, they're quite scared of her as well. And as you said, she was very clear that anyone who comes to her asking for money is basically going to get shouted at and chased out of the Treasury. And it was a very energetic, forceful speech that was framed by this ironclad discipline. Iron Lady, I think she might be sort of nudging us towards calling her.
Well, is she the new Iron Lady when it comes to the country's finances if Labour win the election? Ian, you were a Conservative supporter and have been for decades, up until February. Is that what changed your mind?
Well, that's one of the most impressive speeches I've heard from a conference platform in decades, Joe. I mean, we may have a shadow iron chancellor. We may be about to have an iron chancellor quite soon. It was absolutely filled with policy. We'll probably debate that in a minute or two. But, I mean, she's setting out a pretty clear vision as to how Labour wants to go about the economy. And, well, I mean, I think both those in the room but those of us in business have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, but what are you looking forward to? What is it that's going to change substantially in terms of the economic landscape? Labour, if they win, will inherit all of the problems and issues that business has had to deal with up until now.
They will, and both Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have been talking about system change, right? Sounds a little bit technical.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? That means clarity and consistency. Moving away from, I think, where we have been as businesses, constant chopping and changing. We saw that last week in terms of the biggest single infrastructure investment that could take place into this country. Today, we got clarity.
HS2, no commitment, though, is there, from the Labour Party in terms of wanting to go ahead or revive that northern leg from Birmingham to Manchester, despite all the criticism we heard there yet again from Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, I think it's highly unlikely now that HS2 will be built by either of the big parties. You look at the documents that the Tories put out last week alongside that speech made by Rishi Sunak, and in there it made clear that the government was going to start selling off the land that it built to build those final legs of HS2 up to Manchester. And so the Labour Party can quite easily say, we just don't have the option anymore because the land is going to be sold off by this government. And I think there's a lot of people in the Labour leadership who are quite pleased about that. They don't really want to pick up this white elephant and make it their own. They're quite happy to leave that as theirs and then do other projects, looking at things like Northern Powerhouse Rail, this line between Liverpool and Hull, which we've talked about so many times, but it's never really happened. I think the Labour Party would much rather spend money on that rather than try and fix HS2.
What did you think of the reception for Rachel Reeves?
I mean, that was incredible in the room there. We certainly do not have boring, snoring Rachel Reeves anymore. As Izzy said, you look at the faces on those Labour front benches on the front row, they looked absolutely petrified. And I think there will be some people in the Labour Party who are now thinking they've never really seen Rachel Reeves as a possible future leader. Now there will be some people in the party not thinking now. I do not think there is any challenge to Keir Starmer, but maybe thinking 5 years down the line, could Rachel Reeves be a possible contender?
Right, well, let's welcome part of her team. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, has just joined us here on set. We've been discussing, obviously, the speech by Rachel Reeves. It was uncompromising in its tone. People aren't going to be coming knocking at yours or Rachel Reeves's door if you win the election next year, because, of course, there's no money, is there, Darren? There's no money for you to do the things that you want to do, the transformative change to the UK.
Well, I think you heard in Rachel's speech there that we are ambitious about transforming the country as well as maintaining strong fiscal discipline, highlighting the waste under the Conservatives that will not happen under a Labour government, streamlining those infrastructure projects to make sure that we are building the country's infrastructure and investing where appropriate alongside the private sector to make sure that the country's building.
Right, on infrastructure, we just talked briefly there about HS2. Can you confirm, rule out, a Labour government would not return or revive HS2, the northern leg from Birmingham to Manchester?
No, because there's another 12 or 18 months to the next election. The Conservatives have blown it up. What we can't do is commit to building a project which has ended before we've even come into government.
Right, when it comes to growth, the core mission, we heard it there from Rachel Reeves, we heard it from Keir Starmer at the weekend. To get growth in the economy, that is going to solve all of our problems. How are you going to get it?
Well, to move the dial on economic growth, you need everybody across the whole of government working in partnership with the private sector and the public sector to be absolutely focused on that being the driving mission of a government.
Having a driving mission is one thing, but how do you actually achieve growth? Rachel Reeves may be able to magic miracles, but we've had every Prime Minister over the last few years saying they want growth, and it hasn't happened.
Well, look, what is growth? Growth is businesses selling more things, making more profit, people's pay going up because their work is more productive. There's a whole host of policy levers you have to pull to make that happen on skills, on planning, on investment, on exports. You've not just heard from Rachel, but you've heard other members across the cabinet that will want to deliver that in government.
But be honest, it's not going to happen soon, is it? It's not going to happen in the first few months of a Labour government. Everything will look pretty much the same if you win the election next year.
Well, the whole idea of the missions is that they are bold and ambitious, and they will stay for the course of the next Labour government. government, because we're not going to chop and change around policy priorities or change targets or policy direction left, right and centre like the Tories have. So it is hard, but it is achievable, and we're all absolutely focused on it.
But everyone gathered here isn't going to notice much difference. Not really. Not with a Labour government in the first few months or even the first year. Strikes could continue. We know that from some of the unions that we've spoken to, because there isn't a penny more going towards unions or pay. We're going to have the same sort of backdrop, the problems for business in terms of getting staff and personnel. There isn't going to be a marked change in the first year, because you can't.
Look, we're not trying to sell utopia to people. We're being very honest that the inheritance from the Tories is a complete car crash. It is going to be hard to turn the economy around, but you will see a difference from a Labour government in a whole host of areas, in your local community and nationally, in the way in which government functions.
And how and why should we trust you? Why should we trust you and Sir Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister if you win next year, when he abandoned his whole prospectus that he launched at the leadership?
Keir has been very clear for some time now about the 5 missions that we have for the country.
He had 10 pledges.
Everybody
They've all gone.
will be delivering on. Those pledges were some time ago when he was running for leader. He has set those 5 missions. They are set for the country. And look at how Labour delivered on in government, whether it was about infrastructure delivery, public sector reform, people's pay in their pocket, growth and exports. It was better under Labour last time. It will be better under Labour next time.
It's a very difficult economic situation, of course, when Labour won in 1997.
That's because the Tories have trashed the economy.
Well, let's just take one example. We'll show Ed Miliband there. He was sitting, as you say, listening to the speech by Rachel Reeves. Labour has a bold climate investment pledge of 28 billion extra pounds each and every year to 2030. But that's already been watered down, hasn't it? It's not going to happen immediately. Is it?
Well, look at the date. That was 2021.
So that's changed already.
No, well, you have to be honest about the impact of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng on the economy. We will be fiscally responsible in our investments if the cost of borrowing goes through the roof because the Tories have trashed the economy. We have to be pragmatic about that, which is what we've set out. And the other thing that we've been very clear on is that this investment is going into big national infrastructure. It takes some time to get to spend that properly and in an effective way. You won't be able to deliver it in the first few months.
Listen, I take what you say at face value. That's absolutely fine. But what I'm asking for is trust in what you've pledged. And that trust, that pledge has been watered down in terms of timing. It's also been watered down in terms of substance. Because Rachel Reeves has said it won't be an extra £28 billion. It'll be an extra £20 billion each and every year once it starts, because you're going to take £8 billion that the Conservatives are already committed to.
You can trust the answers I'm giving you because I'm being very direct and honest in the answers I've just given you. 2021, the economy looked different because that was before Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. The inheritance that we have of the Tories' misrunning of the economy has real-world implications, and we're being honest with the public, both about our ambitions but also the inheritance that we'll be inheriting from the Tories.
Ian Anderson is here. He switched from the Conservative Party to support the Labour Party. But what are the key things you want to see a Labour government do if they win next year when it comes to things like infrastructure and workers?
So on infrastructure, any business, any investor, whether or not they're a domestic investor or an international inbound investor, it's quite simple now. We just want to see consistency of decision making. You know, I mean, that has been absolutely writ large in terms of people's thinking. The other thing, and I've been in the business conference this morning before listening to Rachel's speech, if I've heard it once, I've heard it in virtually every question, Joe, and that's about skills. Every single sector of our economy, post-COVID, has a significant skills shortage. So what Labour is going to do about that is absolutely vital. Final one, and this is sort of related to, you know, your point about what Ed was saying is, look, we've heard Rachel say taxes are not going up. This is very, very difficult given the fiscal environment. So real commitments, and that is about consistency, to ensure that taxes are not going up on business too.
And we've been entirely consistent on tax, on capital investment, and on spending. We're delighted about the amount of businesses that are here at conference this year. We're having to turn them away because there's not room, but you are right. We're hearing from small businesses all the way to the largest businesses that they want consistency, they want to improve planning, they want to make things easier to build in this country so that we can secure that investment. That was at the very heart of Rachel's speech today to Labour Party conference.
Right, but if you're not going to invest or you're not going to borrow to invest any more than what you have pledged, which has been slightly diluted on things like skills, then where's the transformative change?
Well, the key thing from Rachel's speech today was that our investments will be leveraging private sector investment so that for every pound of taxpayers' investment. We want £3 from the private sector. That's about working together with the private sector to deliver the growth that we need to see in the country.
One of the problems, of course, is that without more tax revenue, how do you fund public services?
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask, is how can you actually guarantee that you're going to stick to your spending plans? There's a lot of scepticism. Paul Johnson from the IFS was saying that this morning. If you look at public services like the NHS, I mean, you know, the Tories, who are not famously in favour of pouring huge amounts of money into the NHS, have nevertheless had to do that. But the health service has been under a huge spending squeeze for quite a long time. There's obviously a workforce plan that is only, I think, half funded. So how are you actually going to stick to those spending plans when you've got these hugely salient public service priorities that are going to be, you know, Rachel's scary, but they're still going to be knocking on her door?
Well, look, we've got to turn the country around, and that means about reform as well. You know, as Deputy Chancellor, it's my job to make sure that all of the front bench teams, all of the departments are in line with our fiscal rules. We've made the commitments on some of the tax changes that you heard in the speech today. But the key thing is you can't just keep throwing more and more money at a broken system. I will not sign off a business case request from any of my colleagues unless it is anchored in growth and or reform. You have to see reform of public services so that they improve the quality of services and in the long run reduce the cost of running them.
Even when you're heading into a winter crisis in the NHS, you're not going to say, you know, sorry, you have to reform things. It's a bit like saying you have to install fireproof blankets when the building's already on fire.
Because that's the excuse the Tories have said. There are too many crises, too many world events, too many things we can't control. The whole reason Keir Starmer talks about missions is because we have to deal with those long-term problems in the interest of the country for the long term.
Continue under a Labour government.
There could be a whole host of things.
Right, and you're happy for that to continue and undermine people's ability to get an appointment, to be seen at a hospital, that waiting list will just grow bigger?
No, you have to deal with the issues. And under the last Labour government, we didn't have one national strike in the NHS because we actually sat down with the workforce and came to a pragmatic deal that we could afford that was in their interest. And by the way, those public sector workers are not just striking because of pay, they're striking because of the conditions in which they're working, which is why public sector reform and investment in the health system, in the education system, through the tax changes on non-DOMs, on private school fees and private equity that we've announced today is really, really important.
Although those tax rises are really quite small when you compare it to the day-to-day spending by the government currently.
We've got to get out of this business of thinking a few billion quid is small. That is a lot of money. Yeah. It's how it's spent.
How does it compare to 1,000 billion of public spending day-to-day?
You can't dilute the idea that spending billions of pounds on the health service is a small intervention.
And that will be transformative.
It will deal with the backlog, which you'll hear more about in Keir's speech tomorrow.
The problem that the Labour Party's got is we are sat here possibly around a year before a general election. The Labour Party is around 20 points ahead of the Tories in the polls. But you speak to Darren's colleagues and the thing they are worried about, they think the card that the Tories will play, because they can't really play the change card as much as Rishi Sunak says, I'm the change candidate. That doesn't really work to the public. Their record is difficult over the last few years. You know that the Labour Party's been good at prosecuting on that. So what do you have left? You've got the card of scaremongering and saying if you vote for a Labour Party, it'll be really bad for your finances, it will really make your family struggle. And the only way the Labour Party can guard against that is by making strong speeches like this from Rachel Reeves.
John, I never thought I'd be able to say this, but the mini-budget blew up that idea last year. The reason I left the Conservative Party is because of a fiscal mess. Now, Labour still has to put this goal into the net, you absolutely do, but it's completely changed the national conversation and how businesses think about this conversation.
Right, just briefly, Isabel, we now know, because I think a video was played in the conference hall, that Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor, has given his support to Rachel Reeves and her ideas and plans. How important is that?
Well, this is one of the big questions that Labour does want to answer this week, which is, if not the Tories, why us? And having a sense of momentum of people who have said, not the Tories, Labour are the only game in town, helps them to give a sense that people are turning towards them as a serious party of government and that they're worth considering. Because this is the problem they have, is that voters, are manifestly fed up with the Conservatives, but they're not confident that Labour is giving them the answers they want. And that's something that Conservative MPs who I was talking to last week were saying, that on the doorstep, their voters are saying, we want a reason to stick with you, rather than, oh, we think Labour's great, they're going to give us a free pony or whatever. Actually, you can't give a free pony. You can't give sort of big public spending.
Thank you for confirming that, Darren.
Anti-pony policy.
Anti-pony. on that happy note, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much to my guests. Thank you very much, Darren Jones, for joining us. And we've discussed Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor speech. She's hoping to be the first female Chancellor of the UK. Please join us tomorrow. We've got a special programme for Keir Starmer's speech at 1:45 to 3:45. But I will be back at 12:15, as usual, here in this seat at the Labour Party conference. Please join me then. From all of us here, have a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Well, that was bloody entertaining, wasn't it? Rachel Reeves kind of makes me think she's going to be the next Prime Minister after Keir Starmer. Just saying. That speech was pretty good. Reason why I like Rachel Reeves, and this is just me being slightly biased, but if I want to hire somebody to do a job, I'd probably want them to have the right skill set. And she's running to be the Chancellor. It's probably a good idea she's an economist, or was an economist, for the Bank of England of all places. Pretty much gets a tick from me, just saying. I don't really like the way she speaks. She sounds like she's going to beat me up. But, like everyone said, she sounds terrifying when she speaks. She does. She definitely sounds like she's packing dildos or something. I don't know. She's going to slap you around with a big pair of metal balls. But anywho, yeah. I've said this in my last stream. The only thing about Britain that people need to remember is you don't win elections in Britain, you fucking lose them. So just don't scare the public. Don't say anything fucking retarded. I mean, they could go with nationalising the water. You just can't pay for it. That's the problem. Like, we're proper fucked. The Tories really screwed the fucking pooch when it comes to the economy. Like, wow. I mean, that guy on the end there, he's a Tory, and he's left the Tories. I don't know how many people I've seen this week saying, I used to vote Tory and now I'm fucking in Labour's fucking team. You know, you had the guy who owns Tesco, he was saying the only game in town's Labour, and that was fucking ages ago. The guy who owns Iceland, he's voting for Labour. He wants to be a Tory MP, now he's going to Labour. I don't know, it's a bit weird. But anyway, him, the guy who owns Curry's, he was there, what was it, Sunday. He's probably going to, you know, back for Labour. It's very interesting. At the end of the day, it's right. The Tories have been in power for fucking ages. And Britain tends to be lazy when it comes to voting. They're just like, oh, okay, keep going, keep going. And then you screw the pooch and then they don't vote for you kind of shit. Like I'm saying, it's yours to lose in elections in Britain. So hopefully they don't do anything drastic. Because the right wingers will have a fucking field day, like they said. The whole fear thing. Like, bizarre real. Anyway, we're back tomorrow. We've got Keir Starmer's speech tomorrow, I think. Is it tomorrow? I don't know. Might be. Fuck knows. Anyway, it's this week. I think Keir Starmer's speaking tomorrow. So, enjoy the rest of your day. And I will be back. Hope you enjoyed the speech or whatever.